Welcome to Stoughton Spotlight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Pickette. We're back for our Conversations with the Candidates series, where I'll be sitting down with all of the candidates running for the Board of Selectmen and the School Committee, the two contested races on the ballot this year for the April 2018 town election. On this episode, I'm sitting down with the incumbent School Committee Chair, Molly Cochran, who is running for School Committee. Molly, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk with you, Jeff.
There's there's two candidates running for school committee for one seat. Up until very recently, there was a third candidate, but Dr. Erdem Ural announced that he was dropping out of the race. So we have Molly Cochran, who is joining me today, and Barbara Marshall are the two remaining candidates again for that one school committee seat. So Molly, let's get started. Let's look back at the last 3 years, and what would you say would be either yours or the board's biggest achievement over the past 3 years? And then second part to that question is, if reelected, what's your biggest goal for your second term?
All right, I'll try to remember those two questions. I think over the span of the 3 years, one of the achievements, quite frankly, I believe, is having a board that is now constituted of a number of individuals, certainly from different walks of life, certainly from different professions with different ages of kids, who work very professionally and cohesively and respectfully as a board. So that when we are having our public board meetings, school committee meetings, I think they run efficiently. I think the interaction between the board and the administrators who speak to us, or the individuals who come before the board, is all very productive. It's very open, it's very transparent. There's a lot of good people on the board who ask, again, their own independent questions, ask a lot of good questions. And then again, in executive session, when we're behind closed doors, I think we're able to work together in a very focused and productive fashion. There's nobody on the school committee for any of the wrong reasons. There's nobody on the school committee who's seeking to undermine anybody. Everybody is just there because they care about the children. They care about the state of education in Stoughton. And again, I'm always impressed by what different people bring to the school committee it is either, unexpected or just a viewpoint that I wasn't wasn't expecting. But I'm sort of very proud of how we work together as a school committee, and the dialogue that we have with the administration. And again, I think the openness and the way we conduct meetings with the public, and hopefully the public appreciates that. I was told years ago that the Stoughton School Committee meetings had high ratings because people love to watch the conflict and the open conflict, and sometimes it was negative and it was rather embarrassing. So while we always want to have differing points of view, I think that we're working them out, and I think we're going through issues in a very productive fashion. As far as achievement for the future, that's a great question and something I've been thinking about a lot. I think you both have, one of the achievements, I should say, that the main very concrete achievement is that we will be hiring a new superintendent in 2019. The superintendent is an extremely powerful position, has a great influence throughout the education system, and I think my goal is to hire the best superintendent we can hire somebody who reflects the values and the priorities of this town, who will fit well into the town, and who will really be dedicated to supporting the education of every single child, whether it's a child with special needs or a child who is a child of immigrants. We have obviously people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. I really would hope that we would be able to attract a superintendent who would fill all those needs and also interface well with the public and be here on a long-term basis, because turnover in superintendents is generally not healthy for the school system.
And so certainly in the news now, unfortunately, is school safety issues.
Yes.
And with the terrible events that happened down in Florida recently. Depending on when you're watching this as the viewer, there's actually a public forum that the school is hosting, Stoughton schools are hosting on March 19th to discuss school safety.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to ask a couple questions related to that. One, from a school committee role, the role a school committee can play in making sure that our schools are safe.
You're absolutely right, and it is it is a school committee role, along with the superintendent. As a member of, as I think all the school committee members are, the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, we did all get an email about a week or so ago from the head of that organization referring us to actually some outlines of priorities and obligations, responsibilities that were developed in New Jersey. And I have read those and studied those, and I do want that to be something the school committee very soon sits down and looks at. So basically, yes, it is the obligation of the school committee. It's a very grave obligation, a very serious obligation. And I'm sure that it weighs heavily on our shoulders, and it weighs heavily on the shoulders of the superintendent and of the school department. And of the police department. And I believe that we do have a very good relationship, a very productive relationship between this superintendent and the police department. Our school committee did, in executive session, address these issues a few months ago in the fall. There was a meeting, there was an update about what measures are being taken. Those obviously need to be reevaluated and reexamined all the time. We need to be as aware as we can be as the scope of the risk and fighting it on every front. Unfortunately, it's obviously not just a local issue. It can't just be resolved locally. It has to be resolved on a bigger scale as well. But I think that we are certainly charged with doing everything humanly possible, along with the Stoughton police, to reduce and eliminate the risk, including, of course, being aware of students or anybody in the community who might be out there who might seem to pose a risk, to take the actions, hopefully prophylactically ahead of time, to address that individual and their issues before something bad happens.
Well, I always know that the budget's always highly contested, and there's only so many dollars to go around. But is it also something consideration of adding more guidance counselors or adding more adjustment counselors, staffing that way, so that more people can be seeing a less number of students as, a smaller caseload and a more personalized caseload? Yes.
You're absolutely right, and I think that that's something that I would support, and I know that there has been some move in that direction to increase the guidance counselors. I think those were one of the positions that that was perhaps underfilled when the recession came and have been filled more and more. I believe one of the positions actually that Dr. Izzi is looking to add is even at the preschool level, to take children who are coming in and seem to be having adjustment issues in preschool and even having somebody to start addressing those at those level. We're also talking about adding to the budget an additional guidance counselor, which is not an adjustment counselor, but another individual who's really going to be focusing more on the transition to college and career, so college, and even for students who aren't going to perhaps to college or aren't going to a full-year college, which I think fills many roles, but it's also another individual who hopefully students can reach out to and connect with. And I think that is perhaps for some students, especially those who don't have perhaps a cushy transition to college, that's a period of maybe uncertainty and an anxiety, and where do I fit in life if I'm not going here, or if I don't have the financial support to go here. And to have another counselor to speak to them and help them through that transition, I think could be very effective.
One of the, I would say, themes I've been reading in relation to school safety is kind of an offshoot of that. People have been talking about boys and society in general. And I've actually read an article this morning that was making the point that, our boys are being left behind. And whether you want to directly relate that to school violence, let's separate that and just talk about achievement.
Yes.
And if you look, even just anecdotally, if you look at who's being inducted into the National Honor Society, who's finishing in the top 10, who's placing in science fair or DECA competitions, boys are not reaching the same levels that girls are at Stoughton High School. I can't speak for other schools, but first of all, do you observe that? And secondly, what can the school committee do to make sure that boys aren't being left behind if in fact they are?
That's a great question. And that calls to mind that when I went to the MASC school committee conference, I think it was 2 years ago, on the Cape, which is an educational conference for school committee members all over the state, they had a speaker on that issue. And he was very stirring and very inspirational in saying that, yes, the statistics are bad about boys finishing high school, and certainly about boys going to college and finishing college. Many of the colleges, it's like 55% or 60% women versus 40 to 45% men. So that's a problem, and he was suggesting that we shouldn't just accept those results, but we should say, what should we be doing differently? It's not that boys aren't as intelligent as girls, and we know that, but they do sometimes stumble, and you're right, and that's not necessarily good for society or safe for society. I think that that is something that we perhaps don't have something targeted at this point at looking at. I would love to look at that. I don't really know what the statistics are in our high school per se, but I certainly know society generally. There are fewer men going to college, so fewer men who are excelling in high school or young men or boys. So I would love to look into that, and it may be, again, that kids might be kind of turned off because they don't fit into the sitting still, rigorous academic model starting in elementary school, and then they maybe get on the wrong track. I think we're also bound between the flexibility for different students should have different approaches to education or how they sit through a classroom or what they do, and standard. So I think there is a tension between, we all want to excel, we want our kids to do great, we want to have good MCAS scores. There is a lot of testing, there's a lot of data-driven analysis, but also how do we have flexibility so that some kids who aren't comfortable or maybe rebel against that role model can also learn at their own pace. IEPs should help with that, the fact that obviously we have a lot of students on IEPs, but I do think it's a bigger, as you say, a society gender issue, and I do think it should be addressed.
Looking now at another issue, it seems to come up every cycle, the teacher's contract.
Yes.
It expired at August 31st, 2017, so essentially the start of this current school year.
Yes.
I know you can't get into details and negotiations, but what's the status of where we are right now? Do you feel we're close to a deal, or because these have dragged on sometimes for more than a year?
Yes, well, I'm hopeful that we're close to a deal. I'm hopeful that things are going well. Our negotiating team, who was appointed by the prior chair, but I thought it was a brilliant appointment, quite frankly, is Anita Hill and Joe McDonough. And Joe McDonough is a member of a union, so he grasps the issues so very well. So I think he certainly respects the union and the union contract. So I have learned from them that, first of all, that the negotiations, perhaps unlike last time, have actually been very cordial and respectful. They are currently in mediation, so the parties mutually feel that they have reached an impasse. They are in mediation. I do think that the issues are economic issues, quite frankly. 3 years ago, before I was on the school committee, my understanding was that the union did negotiate and got a very favorable contract. Perhaps we are being a little bit more fiscally conservative this time, and I think it's going to take some time to work those issues out. But in that context, we have to remember that as of today, the school budget that the school committee voted to approve is about more than $400,000 off what the Board of Selectmen is approving. So we do have a bit of a financial hurdle. We don't know if we're going to get over that $400,000+ hurdle. That does factor into how we can negotiate that contract, because that's a huge part of the school budget is the teachers' salaries. And
one other issue too is recently there was voted to, or I don't know if voting is the right word, just this decision to evaluate the superintendent on every other year,
yes,
essentially, so every 2 years. Can you talk to me kind of like how that decision came about, what the thought process was there, especially where the next review might be before Dr. Rizzi is, basically ready to retire.
Right, because she's retiring in the summer of 2019.
Right.
The issue was proposed this year, both Anita Hill and Vice Chair Katie Pinanokian went for multiple days, I believe, again, to the MASC conference on the Cape, and they came back basically relaying to the school committee that when you have a superintendent who has achieved a proficient level in her annual reviews for multiple years, that the practice is that then you go to a biannual review. But that biannual review would still involve, similar to the teacher review system, a formative mid-cycle, which would be 1 year, would be the mid-cycle review, which is less formal, and then a final summative review after the 2 years. So we did discuss this at one of the school committee meetings. I initially was not convinced, but we had the discussion, we talked it out, and they thought the fellow members of the school committee thought that it made sense to go to that system. So our plan would be to still do a review. It's not going to be the formal summative review process, but in alliance with what most school districts do, we will, and we're talking about whether it's going to be this spring or whether it would be just right at the end of the school year, what makes more sense to pull the data and to go over the 5 goals and to say, where are you, have you, succeeded in these goals, et cetera. Also, and I thought it was important in that discussion, we talked about we can add goals. So I definitely think that I wasn't comfortable with sort of just keeping that frozen in place with those 5 goals, although many goals are complex enough it makes sense to have a 2-year period for the goals. I definitely want it to be open to adding goals, so we're going to be adding goals as well.
Now, given there's been a handful of stories that have been very big and have made headlines, namely the case where a teacher, slept with a student, had inappropriate relationship with a student, a case where, multiple cases of anti-Semitism in the schools. The administration had varying degrees played varying roles in those situations right there. So is not reviewing them, kind of the wisest move when, how are you going to hold them accountable, or at the very least, evaluate their roles in those situations without a review? How does that
I appreciate
work?
that question, and those are very, very serious issues and controversies that have been raised.
Sure.
That we have spent a lot of time and anxiety on. Those issues and the superintendent's response to them there's a very, the vehicle for superintendent evaluations is very much dictated by these very strict parameters. So it's not about other issues, it's about the 5 goals, it's about SMART goals. Are they measurable, are they attainable, do you approve the goals ahead of time, and then you're only allowed to evaluate them on the goals. That doesn't mean that, of course, you don't have dialogue, critique, feedback, examination of what did you do, what did you not do, why did you do it, and many of those discussions have happened and been fairly intensive discussions, and will continue to happen. So there's always, I would say, outside of the parameters of the limitations on the formal review with the 5 goals, there's always our responsibility, quite frankly, to speak to the administration as to what they may or may not have done right, to review carefully, to listen, quite frankly, to the public, to listen to the union about their perspective on all these issues, and quite frankly, with respect to the teacher with the inappropriate relationship with the student, I have to say it's one of the most horrible things as a parent that could happen. We have reviewed it. We will continue to review it. It's in litigation. Mm-hmm. The lawyers will be exploring it. We will continue to review it as the lawyers and the litigation process continues. I certainly feel for the student. And hope and pray for the student's recovery, and that her privacy rights get protected as she moves along. I can't speak to specifically what we have done or what we might do, because the case obviously is in litigation. Mm-hmm. But I do feel that I think it may be frustrating for the public when sometimes they make their feelings known and people don't get fired or people don't get suspended. You have to understand, a superintendent has a written contract. A superintendent will always have a written contract with a just cause for termination. And I'm actually not even talking about the past in this superintendent. I'm maybe talking about expectations going forward. Superintendent is a highly paid, high-level job. There will be a negotiated contract. There will be a clause that say you can only be terminated for these reasons. And when people hear things that make them unhappy or make them question the superintendent, and I hear they should just be fired, you're not going to lightly fire a superintendent. Doesn't mean that you don't speak to them about what you're hearing from the public and about your perspective, and hope that they learn from mistakes that may have been made.
Are you satisfied with the administration's response? We'll stick, they're 2 very separate issues.
Yes,
so
they are.
We'll stick with the inappropriate relationship with the student. Because unfortunately, it's not the only case either. There's been other cases as well that I don't think have reached that level.
There's been another case where somebody was immediately let go.
Right, exactly, yes. But are you satisfied with the response?
So that's where it's in litigation, and I can't comment on that.
And in terms of the other case, that also is in various forms of litigation. There's grievance. Well, it's past the grievance stage. It's there's three cases. One's already been settled that have gone to arbitration with teachers that have been disciplined. Yes, well, let me explain it.
Yes, so there were 3 teachers who were disciplined.
Right.
They took that to the arbitration level. 2 of the arbitrations are still in process.
Right.
1 of the arbitrations was completed, and the arbitrator did uphold the administration's decision on that case.
Is it a shame in a sense that it's come this far anyways, that that something couldn't have been worked out prior to it going all the way to
I actually don't,
arbitration?
Without disclosing what happens in this executive session, I don't recall there being any offers by the union to work things out. It is a shame. It is a shame from the beginning of the incident to the end. It's a shame. It's a shame as far as negative feelings and bad feelings and distrust and anger. It's a shame, and I actually just want the public to understand that just because a teacher receives a letter of reprimand doesn't mean it's not a good teacher, doesn't mean they're not a good person, doesn't mean they're not going to continue to be a good teacher or even a great teacher. There's obviously a balancing and a decision making that the superintendent has to make and that the principal has to make, and I just have to say I respect the decision of the arbitrator who has ruled on the first. And whatever the decisions are on the other 2 outstanding grievances, we will respect that. And I really want to move on. And hopefully, I think some lessons have been learned about the public's concern about disclosure about these issues. And I have to say, given what's going on politically, nationally, and internationally, I understand the public's concern about wanting to be notified and to be advised when these things happen.
Sure. Well, I just actually the other day reading in the Boston Herald, the ADL released statistics recently, which I don't want to quote the exact numbers because I don't have it in front of me, but it was over 50% increase.
Yes, I saw that.
In reported cases of anti-Semitism in the country just in the past year.
Yes.
So it's certainly something that is not just a Stoughton issue, it's more than that. But given that, going back to, do you feel that the administration has been able to improve or learn lessons from its initial response to the anti-Semitism, which I would say it's fair to say was widely panned, the initial response?
Yes. I think so, and I think you've seen that in the response to additional things that have happened since then, including another incident at the high school, which was shocking to me that anybody would do what happened. The student did something, another high school student did something. And I also think it goes to, the teenage brain. What is the teenage brain thinking when they do these things, quite frankly? So yes, that was disclosed, and other incidents have been disclosed, and I think that they did, like I say, I think the voice of the public is important, and I think you need to keep in mind the public interest and the public's perspective on things.
And do you feel that a thorough enough investigation was done with the anti-Semitism case? And the reason I ask that is because there have been 3 teachers that have been looked into, but that was due to a specific complaint. I don't know, maybe there is a larger investigation that's looked into other cases where teachers may have also discussed the incident in class with their students or also had lunchroom conversations or, just other, because it seems that, because I've certainly heard that there have been other conversations. So I was just wondering if there's been a more thorough investigation or even of the administration's response, because again, there was the Emerson report, but that wasn't really discussed in too much detail in the school committee meeting. It was, if you want to go read it, you can, but it wasn't really. So I guess, has this been thoroughly looked at from top to bottom, all levels, either by the school committee, by the administration, by somebody else?
The school committee certainly was happy to see Mr. Emerson's report and to see his perspective. The school committee also saw the outside investigator's report in response to the parent complaint. I would say, have we launched a broader investigation as a school committee as to whether anybody else may have, as a teacher or a staff member, discussed the matter in a way they shouldn't have? I'm not aware of that. I'm quite frankly worn out. We've been accused of, the administration's been accused of a witch hunt. We're not out to look for additional people to punish.
I don't know, and I don't want to suggest that either. It's more so just like the three teachers that are in the process of, or have been punished, or in the process of, two of them still with their arbitration case, that, maybe that it's rather arbitrary, so to speak. That, it's just to have
it's
just
not
three
well,
people.
it resulted from a specific
complaint, right?
Parent complaint,
right?
So I don't think in that sense it was arbitrary. If they want to tell us there was a much widespread culture of people always talking about, staff or teachers always talking about in front of their classes, student misconduct. I'm not aware of a larger investigation being launched into that. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't disagree that it's possible that happened, either with respect to that incident or something else. And I would also think that's something that the attorneys representing the union would bring that up if that's going to be a defense, that this is a widespread culture, we always do this.
Sure, that's certainly not the defense of everybody does it is certainly not a defense, but just more or less, I was just trying to get the scope of if there's been a larger just
not by the school committee.
Into it.
No, not by the school committee. Not beyond what Mr. Emerson concluded.
All right, so we have these half hours go by rather quickly.
Well, you asked great questions, actually.
Well, thank you. We have a minute left, and so I like to do this at the end. I give the candidates an opportunity to make a pitch to voters, be able to say why voters will be asked to pick just one candidate for school committee, and why that vote should go for you.
Well, I'd appreciate people considering me for their vote. I have worked very hard the last 3 years, and there is rather a learning curve. Just because your kids have been in school doesn't mean that you actually understand what goes on behind the curtain, and all the detailed responsibilities of the school committee and of the administration, all the legal requirements, all the the issues with respect to the union rights and the union grievances. So I feel like I have learned an awful lot. I feel like I joined this or ran for school committee to begin with because I have a passion for education, very interested in educational issues, interested in how education is obviously the key to everything, the key to equality in our society. And I am actually probably a frustrated teacher. That in certainly a teaching career would have been in the ability to influence young minds. I think is an amazing power. I'm very happy with the quality of the teaching at Stoughton School. I want to support the teachers. I want to support good administration decisions. I want to help choose the very best superintendent. And I do think my expertise and my background, being on the school committee for a few years, does help me go through that process to make sure that we vet very carefully in these superintendents, that we make sure that they hold to the values of Stoughton, which I think promotes and values and embraces diversity, and embraces the holistic child, and embraces all those extracurriculars, I think, that make it a rich school experience for our students.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Molly, and thank you for tuning in. And make sure you check out our other conversations with the candidates from this election cycle. I'm Jeffrey Pickette, and you've been watching Stoughton Spotlight. Thanks for tuning in.